second in a series of strange panoramic camera videos that we're doing. I'd like to introduce you to the Noblex, which is a German panoramic camera from, gosh, I think relatively recently. I think they made them until the year 2000. And this one is a 120 format. They made 35 millimeter ones as well. They made ones that were, they actually made a few different versions of panoramics. Different size negatives, different, I think there was a 617, I think. Anyway, this one is the 6150 Pro. It actually gives you a 5 by 12 centimeter negative, so roughly the same proportions as your X-Pan or as the 6 by 12, a little bit wider than a 6 by 12, which is, well, I mean, widely, is understood to be sort of natural vision, human vision. What you look at and see is roughly the 6 by 12 crop at, I'm not sure what focal length, probably 50 mils or something like that. So lo and behold, we have a 50 millimeter negative on this camera, and I just want to walk you through this camera and the big issue with it that you have to reconcile yourself to. It's nothing about the camera. It's just, well, it is about the camera, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's just something that you need to be well aware of if you're going to shoot with this camera. So let's take a look here. So we've got, the camera is about as plain Jane as they get. There is a lens in there, and it is, you can see that little slit there, and basically what happens is that the lens travels in a circle like this, and the lens has that little thing there, projects a slit or a vertical line onto the film as it comes around, so the lens and the film are parallel at all times. And so it is a Tessar lens, f4.5, 50 millimeter. It is incredibly sharp, and the reason why it's incredibly sharp is because you rotate the lens can give you, you can basically use the sweet spot of the lens from corner to corner on your negative, which is really helpful. The aperture is set, if you can believe it, here. So what you do is you just, there's a little wheel, and you just change it, f4.5, f5.6, and you've got half stops. In fact, it's infinite, so it's stepless, so you can do whatever you want in your stops. So, and then the camera itself, we've got handles, which are ostensibly so that you can actually shoot this thing handheld, which I gotta say, I haven't tried that. I'd like to. When we were out shooting before, it wasn't particularly, well, actually one day it was really bright, but I had it on tripod just to try and minimize things. But these are here to make sure that your fingers don't get into the frame, which they can easily do, given that it's such a wide sweep. The camera has that many controls aside from that. You've got shutter speed, 1/15th of a second, a 30th, a 60th, a 1/25th, and a 2/50th. You have an advanced knob, you have a multiple exposure switch, you have a shutter button, and you have a viewfinder with a little bubble level, and that's it. Powered by 4 AA batteries, which go, strangely enough, in there. It's kind of interesting. And they're one on top of the other, which is a bit of a challenge. And it's, like that's it. There's no meter, there's nothing else. So this is how it works. So what you do is you turn it on, you make your exposure, f11 at a 1/25th, and you make sure the camera is wound, and you push the button, and that's it. It just pans around and takes the photo. If you want to have a longer exposure, for instance, what you do is you set the camera to 1/15th, and you set the multiple exposure switch over, and as long as you hold the shutter button down, it will do multiple exposures. And as long as you're using a cable release, and as long as you're being careful, it will register those additional exposures onto the film perfectly. There's no meter, there's no mirror to slap. There's no shutter, really. All this thing does is it just spins. And what happens is that once it gets up and running, it just keeps going. So, which is actually kind of fun. And of course, the only problem is that you have to remember, if you want 1/8 of a second, that's 2 rotations. If you want 1/4 of a second, that's 4 rotations. If you want a full second, then you're looking at I don't know what, 16 rotations, something like that. So you do have to count, so there is a bit of work there. But otherwise, that's how you get all those long shutter speeds, and you can go for as long as you want. The viewfinder, these wide-angle viewfinders are really hard because it's really, really hard to know where to put your eye to see what you are looking at. There's no actual line on it that says this is the point of view. You just look at the finder, and of course, if you look over to one edge, you can see a little bit further around and back and forth. So it's at best, it's a guess. So shooting with this camera, like shooting with all cameras like this, requires a fair amount of experience just to get a sense as to what do you see through the viewfinder, what does the camera see on, what does the camera put on the negative. And so now we get to the Achilles heel of this camera, and that is that there's two ways to do a panoramic. There's the way that you do with the Fuji 617 or the Mamaya 617 that we did a video on, where you have a lens that has a really large image circle, which means that the lens projects that image onto a certain size of sensor, film, whatever. A 35mm lens has to cover a 35mm sensor size. Medium format. Large format, 4x5, 8x10, needs to cover at least 5 inches wide or 10 inches wide, with hopefully some additional space so that the edges, which can get kind of mushy, are actually outside of the space that you need. So, which is why those panoramic cameras look kind of ungainly, is because you've got this lens that has to focus this, or not focus, but focus. It has to project this huge circle onto the film that you have, and has to do it in such a way that you get evenly great image quality corner to corner. And the other thing about those cameras is that often lenses will have fall off on the corners, and so you have a center filter. I challenge you to go to eBay and look up a Schneider center filter and see how much they cost. Last one I found was $1,000 US for the filter. And what the center filter does is it tends to, or tries to minimize the difference between the middle of the image and the edges of the image. So 617, if you've got your subject matter and your lens and your film all parallel, and you've got that big XL lens on the front, costs a fortune, weighs a bunch, big camera. Or you can do this, which is you have a lens that's nice and sharp. It only has to cover 6 centimeters, 5 centimeters for that matter. And then what you do is you paint the image on the film as it goes around, and you get tack sharp corner to corner, you get lightweight, you get relatively inexpensive, you get easy to control. It's an f4.5, which is nice. A lot of other lenses, f8, f9 for the big, large format lenses. But there's a drawback, and the drawback is that because the film and the lens are parallel, but it's not parallel to your subject. And what happens is that if you have anything in the foreground or even the midground that has a very distinctive line or a very distinctive plane, it gets disturbed when you do the pan. And anyone who's done a pan with their phone knows what I'm talking about, where the road that's in front of you has a curve to it. Anyway, whatever it is. And so here's an example of a shot that I did down by the river where there is a gate that someone built many years ago covered in ferns. First shot is with the Noblex, second shot is with the Mamaya 7 with a 15mm lens. And you can see the difference in terms of how it renders. And the other thing that we did is we went out to a beach nearby where there was a big windstorm and someone grounded a barge, they grounded a barge on some rocks, and it's been there for months, and it's a new landmark in Vancouver. And we shot a number of shots of the barge, close in, far away, trying to get a sense as to just how close can you get to your subject matter before you start introducing distortion. And now the distortion, in many cases, I don't actually find it particularly, I don't find it displeasing, but sometimes I find it really challenging to deal with. And so the trick with this camera is to get a good sense as to how much of it can you tolerate and get a good sense as to what that's going to look like. And so the further away your subject matter is, or the further away those straight lines are, the less likely you're going to have a situation where you are going to find them curving in the lens or on the film. And that's really kind of it. I mean, that's the Achilles heel of these cameras. The wide lux, exactly the same design of camera, and you can get some really interesting results with it. But it's definitely one of those situations that you need to be able to control and to be able to expect. And if you're going to shoot this camera and you're going to want a nice sharp photo, no problem. Nice lightweight, no problem. Easy to use. Delight actually in terms of shooting. I think you get 6 frames per roll, which is nice, rather than 4 on the 617. There's nothing about it that I, from an optical point of view, from a use point of view, I can't fault it at all. It's very simple. Takes a bit of getting used to, especially if you're loading the film. You need to hit the shutter button and advance it and that kind of stuff, but you only ruin a couple rolls of film, and then you've got it down. The major issue is the design of the camera limits how the image looks, and if you're okay with that, great, and if you're not okay with that, then this camera's not for you. So, so that said, though, it's fun to to haul it around, and I'm actually looking forward to. I would love to. You can get a 2/50th of a second shutter speed on this, and I would love to try out put a roll of Tri-X in there and shoot it wide open and see what I can get for like even street photography or something like that. I haven't done that yet, but looking forward to coming up with some fun stuff, because it's a quirky camera, like all fun cameras. It's rock solid, and it delivers exactly what it promises, just as long as everybody knows what that promise looks like. So that said, the Noblex. I'm still trying to decide, if there's a better way to do panoramics, that suits me. But the Noblex, for the time being, and certainly from a fun factor point of view, been a great camera. So there you have it, and thanks for watching.